Up until now, you've been writing code that executes from top to bottom, and it always executes every single line. But what if you had code that you wanted to execute only under certain conditions? This is where if, and else can come in handy. We can write conditional statements that allow us to determine what the flow of the code should be. You may hear this referred to as control flow. Let's look at the syntax for this. Our first example here is to print a warning message only if the field percentage is less than 20. So I can write an if block. If, and then in parentheses, I put the condition. So we said if the fuel percent is less than 20. And then I open up a block of code. I do this with curly braces. Notice that I'm indented on line 9. And this is where we say console.log warning, low fuel levels detected. Okay, and that's it. We have this line of code that we want to log only if the fuel percent is less than 20. So let's run this. We see absolutely nothing. That's exactly what we were expecting because we were saying we should only print this if the field percent was less than 20, but it's 25. Let's change it to something that is less than 20, and we should see this appear in the console. Warning, low fuel levels detected. Okay, so now you see how this works, right? You create this condition and you say only execute this line of code between these braces here if that condition is true. So what if you wanted two different things to happen depending on whether it was true or false? We can use if and else to make that happen. So in the first instance here, we want to say if the hatch is open, print a caution message. Otherwise, we want to print a confirmation that it's secured. So I'll start with if and say if hatch status is open. Notice I'm using the strict equality operator there to check this string against that string. And then we will say if it's open, caution, external hatch is open. Otherwise, and this is where the else keyword comes in, open another block of code, and we would print this message if it's not open. Hatch is secured, ready for vacuum. Okay, so currently hatch status is locked. Let's run this. We should expect to see the second message. And we do. Hatch is secured, ready for vacuum. If I change this to open and run it again, we see caution, external hatch is open. Okay. What if you have variables that need to be updated? So far, we've just been printing messages, but we can actually set the value of variables depending on a condition. So here we want to say if the ignition has been triggered, then we'll set the engine status to active, otherwise make sure it's set to inactive. So we'll say if is ignition triggered, which is already a Boolean, so it's going to be true or false. We'll set engine status to active. Otherwise, we'll set engine status to inactive. Okay, so currently it's already active and we're saying that the ignition is triggered. We should be able to see that it's active. We do, in fact, have to log it in order to see it. So let's log the value of engine status after our if-else blocks execute. And we see that it's active, so it didn't change it because is ignition triggered is true. What if we changed this to inactive? Run it again, and it's still active because the ignition was triggered. What if we change that to false? And let's put it back to active just to make it more interesting. It's active, but the ignition triggered is false. Just to show that this second block here is going to be executed. And it was. It changed the value to inactive. So that's a very useful situation where you might want to use control flow with conditionals. Let's look at another scenario. We have a light status that is equal to red. Let's write a conditional that will not only check to see if it's green or if it's red and print specific messages for those, but also provide a third message if the value isn't green or red. We'll start with, is light status equal to green? And if it is, we want to print system go. And then we'll do a second condition, else and if, working together. And we need to actually define what that condition is. So we'll check again for light status and say, what if it's red? Then we would print system error. But if it's neither of those, let's have a third message. And we don't need to put a condition here. We can just say else. And this will execute if nothing else does. Unknown status light detected. So let's go ahead and run this with red. And we see system error, just as expected. What if we change it to green? System go. Let's change it to blinking blue. And run it again. And we see unknown status light detected. So what's happening there? JavaScript starting at the top, it's checking the first condition. If it's true, it executes this code. If it's false, it skips it and goes to the next one and says, okay, what if light status is red? Then we'll execute this line. But if that's not true, it skips this altogether and then goes to the last one and says, okay, there's no condition here, which means I definitely just need to execute this, and then I'll move on. The last example here is about having multiple paths, much like we do here, but the order matters. So when you work with numbers, sometimes you're checking to see if numbers are in certain ranges, and you either want to go from biggest to smallest or from smallest to biggest. So here we have a fuel level that is 20. We want to check and see if it's above 80, it's full. If it's greater than 20 but less than or equal to 80, it's nominal. And if it's 20 or lower, it's critical. So the place to start is either at the bottom or the top. Let's choose the top. Let's say if fuel level is greater than 80, and that's exactly what it said, right? It said greater than 80, not equal to 80. Then we will log fuel status full. Else if. Now here, this is where you might think that you need to actually define two different ranges, right? Less than or equal to 80 and greater than 20. But if you think about it, we actually already ruled out anything that's greater than 80. So we'll just check if the fuel level is greater than 20. And if that's the case, we'll log fuel status nominal. Otherwise, if it's anything that is 20 or less, we can just say else fuel status critical. Okay, so again, we're using a process of elimination here. We start with anything greater than 80. If this is true, it'll print this and it'll just exit all of these blocks because they're all part of the same system, right? But if it's false, it's going to skip this line and move on. And we've already established that the fuel level is not above 80, which means we can just then check, is the fuel level greater than 20? And for the last, we don't need a range at all because anything 20 or below is going to be critical. So let's run that. And we see fuel status is critical because it was exactly at 20. And this one did not include equal to 20. It was just greater than 20. So it moved on to this one. What if we say that it's 60? Let's run it again. And we see fuel status is nominal. And of course, if we do something greater than 80, like 82, fuel status is full. All right, that was the last one. I'm going to do a quick git status here. I'm going to add the file, verify that it's staged, and do a git commit with a message, completed basic conditionals demo. Okay, the last thing for you is to head over to this practice and take these variables and the instructions here about how to compare the values or to create other conditional situations and write some if, else if, and else blocks. All right, that's all I've got for you. I will see you in the next one.